right, friends, if I can have you grab a seat, we're going to turn our attention to question and answer time for Philip and for anybody else in the panel as we kind of think through the role that meaningful membership plays in the discipling and the discipling culture that we're praying for in our churches. Philip, when I was listening to you, I think one of the verses that came to my mind was in Ephesians 4, just in verses 15 and 16, Paul writes, "Speaking the truth in love, we are to grow up in him in every way into him who is the head, into Christ, from whom the whole body, joined and held together by every joint with which it is equipped, when each part is working properly, makes the whole body grow."
Yeah.
So that it builds itself up in love. So it's just it's just very helpful, like that body imagery that you hit home with, like when one part of our body is not working. If we have a lame arm, the whole body suffers. So it did a wonderful job just kind of thinking that, kind of walking us through that conversation. So appreciate that. Maybe I just ask everybody on the panel here, if you could just kind of go through and just a couple of bullet points, not a long answer, but bullet points on what are some things that you do in your church to help foster, with God's help, a culture of discipling in your church.
So I'll give you a practical example to illustrate one of the things we do. I had a woman in our church email me this week saying, I'm reading Esther. She's a new Christian. She came to faith late last year. I'm reading Esther, but as soon as I start reading it, I realize I don't know how to make sense of this. Like, we don't have kings. What am I supposed to do with this? Yeah. And I received that email, and what I did with it was reach out to a godly woman in our church who I know has been reading God's word for a while, and I said, do you know of somebody, or would you like to meet up with this sister to read the Bible with her? And if you can do it yourself, can you find another woman to go along with you, and you guys do it together? Yeah. So that's connecting to this principle in Ephesians 4 that you mentioned. The word, as we come around the word, that's actually the genesis of the growth. So let's bring our people around it. That's one practical thing. I like,
as you described that, the image that comes to my mind is part of what our job description is as pastors, is to be air traffic control. Mm-hmm. You're connecting people in your church. You're not doing it yourself, but you're like, you know of an older sister who knows how to read the word, connect her with it. Yeah, that's great. Jonathan Lehman.
A few things, and these are perhaps obvious, but just to state the obvious and make connections. Number one, practicing regenerate church membership, right? Taking steps to make sure the members of your church are regenerate, because it's regenerate people who want to disciple, whereas nominal Christians don't want to disciple, don't care. So that means you're doing membership classes, you're doing membership interviews, you're asking people the gospel when you're doing a membership interview, and usually it's the elders, and then you're sharing their testimony with the entire congregation. So Joe here comes to us from such and such place, and he says he became a Christian then. And hey, by the way, if Joe lives near you, write down his email address, and maybe a couple of you reach out to him this week. Okay, all of that is helping to create the context of a culture of discipleship. Elders praying through the church membership directory and our meetings together focuses on them and encourages us to be reaching out to them. And then, of course, we're modeling that. So if you have elders who are not practicing that kind of prayerfulness in their private, quiet times and that kind of intentionality in their discipleship lives, lunches, coffees, Sunday after church, whatever works for you in your schedule, if elders aren't doing that, members aren't going to do that. A few more things I could say, but that's a start.
You have to turn it on, Brian, and then put it right next to you.
But I had it up there. Did you see? I was growing. Okay, he said all of them. A couple ones that are not as significant as the ones he said, but that I try to do. We have 6 membership expectations when people join the church, and that is one of them. So we just try to clearly enunciate that when they're coming into the church. That's what we expect them to be doing, that there's a lot of freedom in how it can look. But particularly when we do pastoral visits or we're following up with people, that's going to be something we're interacting with them about. The other thing, this is maybe indirect, but sometimes there can be a reflex when you find out people are doing Bible studies that they did not get sanctioned by the church to be nervous. And for, some people have some legit horror stories, it was like, but mostly I think you want to encourage the mess out of that. When you hear that Christians are getting together to read the Bible, you don't want to go around policing that, Now if Chloe's people come to you and say, we have this a Joyce Myers book, then you got to get involved, But you can just assume that it's a fruitful thing, and that those are things to encourage, highlight, pray for. So those are a couple other things too.
Similar, trying to say something that would be useful, helpful, almost new. I've noticed at Liberty, we've been members there for about 10 years. From all of the elders, and then it started getting pushed down into the congregation, is the combination of hospitality and confession of sin. So that it's a regular thing that people are in our homes, and that you use that as an opportunity to confess sin, right? And just that's normal. It doesn't have to be like, okay, this is the moment when I'm about to confess on you, right? But it's actually just happening. Maybe in my case, right, if it's a family, at some point, me and the husband are going to have some time together, and we're just going to talk. We're going to talk about, man, this is what God's showing me in my life. I've been wrestling with this. I'm noting this, and you're just confessing sin. But that's happening in the location of hospitality, right?
One thing that hasn't been said, that I'll say in addition, is Sunday evenings, at our Sunday evening prayer service, one thing that we do is we highlight a few members from the church membership directory. So, and we try to go through that whole directory each quarter at our Sunday evening meetings. And we'll just ask, if those people are there, we'll ask them how they're doing, what prayer needs they might have, and we don't have to pray according to those prayer needs. We can pray, scripture, whatever, over them. But if they're not there, we'll ask the church that's there, are you aware of what's going on in this person's life and what needs they might have? And occasionally, people will be like, well, no one knows. And then, so we'll right there just say, okay, who's going to reach out to them? Who's going to find out what's going on in their lives so that we can be praying for them this week?
I like what you said about evangelism and just saying sometimes people don't evangelize because they feel like they need to be the most eloquent evangelist and the expert in apologetics. I think the same thing for discipling. I think defining it what it's not, because I think sometimes people are intimidated. They think they have to have a PhD in mentoring, and that just intimidates them, and they just don't do it. But it's kind of like when you become a parent, you have no idea what you're doing, but you love the kid and you figure it out. You ask a lot of questions. You read their Bible. You ask other parents, and I think it's kind of like the same thing. So if we're a family, just helping people to realize it's you helping them follow Jesus. This is the context in which it happens. You don't know how to do it. Out of love, you'll figure it out. So I think modeling that and just kind of redefining that in people's minds is helpful. So if you don't know, it's okay. You'll ask questions and figure it out as you go.
I'm not sure what to add to what you brothers have said. I think the primary way that we encourage is what you guys have already mentioned. I was thinking, I like the term air traffic control. I don't know who said that. Was it? Matchmaking is how, as issues come up, we think, oh, we can connect this young lady to this mom, and we can, that's so key. Also, pastoral modeling is so important as well. You can't expect people to do things that you're not willing to set an example for. Whatever you want to be, or whatever you want to see, you have to be. And so, for each pastor to take discipleship seriously as well. But then having sort of, I think, one key is that discipleship has a goal in some way, that it's not just, here's the guy I'm discipling for the rest of my life, but you're able to kind of like, okay, here's the finish line. And it may be different depending on the person, stage of life, your relationship with them. But then the idea is then that they will now pass that on. They can disciple someone. And so you're kind of setting a tone of multiplication or replication as well. I've thought about this as Sam was talking. I just feel like our church is not perfect in this, but there's such a hunger for this, and it happens in a lot of informal ways that I'm just like, oh wow, those people are getting together we get all these reports and like, oh, they were in each other's homes, and like we didn't set that up, it's kind of like what you were saying, Brian, is it's so, but we also have all these avenues. I think we have a variety of avenues for discipleship. We don't have a lot of extraneous programs that have nothing to do with discipleship. So there may be multiple options, and that might be a key is to the extent you're able, if you have the resources. So between community groups, equipping groups, which is basically like our Sunday school equipping groups, women's D groups, pastoral training center, and other things besides, all of those are so word focused and so discipleship based that doesn't just facilitate the hunger that people have, but it also stokes that hunger. We're just a word-centered church, and I think that creates an appetite for people who want to be discipled, and then others who want to pass on the things of the faith as well. So it's helpful that we don't sort of distract with some of these extraneous things that sometimes can be good for churches to do, but we don't focus on those, so we actually are stoking the desire for growth in the Word.
Guys, any other thoughts, questions, or comments for Philip? Jared?
I told him this, but I want to say it again. He's a very sweet man, and I think we got to see that. You just see that whenever he's just chilling. I think, and it was a good picture, even we were talking about earlier. So enthusiasm, what you care about is going to look different. I'm very loud, and he's softer, but you could discern that it was precious to him. And it was effusive in how you were teaching, and yeah, I think that's exactly what you want. You want the church to be able to discern this is precious to you, because it makes it want to be more precious to them too. So I thought you were an excellent example of that, man.
Encouraging.
Any questions? Yeah, right there. Hold on, we'll get your microphone.
He was ready.
I appreciate you ready. Come on, you can stand up. You can stand up.
So, question in the realm of
Name and church.
Cameron Tucker at First Baptist Church in Mulvane. Just a question in regards to how do you deal with church members who might not see the value of meaningful membership, so they are involved, they're regular attenders, they are involved in community with one another in discipleship groups, but they just don't see membership, the actual active membership, as something new. How would you encourage them, specifically, practically speaking, to go about taking that step into not just being here, but becoming a full-fledged member?
I'll say two things. The first one, borrowing from what Brian said earlier today, which was, how did you put it? Your list of
Members only menu.
the members
The
only
bulky-
menu.
The bulky menu.
Bulky. You want a
Yeah,
bulky.
so, you mentioned they're involved in discipleships groups and so forth, and suddenly I'm wondering, well, if they're able to do everything that a member can, then you've sort of disincentivized them from joining the church. So in our church, yeah, you can't join a small group. You might be able to come once, but hardly as a regular thing at all. In fact, I think we would even typically discourage once. You can't get involved in the music team. You can't certainly serve in the nursery and so forth, with childcare. You can't do anything because you've not covenanted together with us in a body. And with that conversation like that, we'll just say, "Hey, listen, we care about you so much. We really think the best way we can serve you is by inviting you to join this church and then be a part of us, right? And then start helping us to serve each other." So we'll have that sort of. So that's the first thing I would say. Then the second thing I would say is, I have discouraged a brother from taking the Lord's Supper, who refused to join after several lunches with him. Refused to join. I said, "This is not an act of excommunication. I don't have the authority to do that. But you are the captain of your own ship. You're flying solo. You're a free agent. I would discourage you from taking the supper." So that'd be two ways.
In case we don't assume it, one answer I would have is, have you sat down with this brother and explained it biblically?
Yep.
Have you walked him through the scriptures about this? And if you have, great. I just don't want to assume that you've done that. And I have this memory in my mind. We had this 68-year-old man in a church I pastored who had come from a Greek Orthodox background. And he was a professing Christian, but he had never been baptized as a believer. And he had a long history in the community, and everybody that talked to me said, Peter's never going to get baptized. He's never going to get baptized. He's baptized an infant. He's never going to get baptized. So he's never going to join our church. And I just went up to Peter. I said, Peter, would you mind if we get lunch? I'd like to talk to you about the biblical case for you getting baptized. And we walked through Acts, and we walked through God's design for that. And at the end of the conversation, he was like,
What prevents me from being baptized?
at the end, seriously, at the end of the conversation, he was like, thank you for explaining this to me from the Bible. I see it. I'd like to get baptized. So let's just, the word can do work like that. And let's assume first that maybe the reason they're not doing it is because nobody's explained it to them. Not miss that one.
Based on how you asked the question, it makes me think as well. I mean, you just have a number of opportunities to teach and apply it. So bend your application in your sermons towards meaningful membership, examples of what godly people in a church do, so you're applying it. But then what you're saying, there's no substitute for hardworking pastors that meet with potential members or current members, like you're saying, and just talking them through it, and then doing it again, and then doing it again, and then prepare your sermon, and then meet with them again, and just like that, and then you just let the Lord do the work.
I want to double click really quick on the Lord's Supper part of that, because I do think that's important. When someone is at least regularly taking the Lord's Supper with your church over a period of time, they're signifying 1 Corinthians 10, 16, and 17, that they are members of the body, if they're doing that in an ongoing way. And so I agree that it is a best practice for the church and for that individual that at some point, and we're going to have different convictions and thresholds for that, but at some point, having a conversation with someone, if they're not in under the discipline and instruction of the church, that they shouldn't be signifying that by ongoing taking the Lord's Supper with the church.
This is a last resort, so I don't recommend starting here, but eventually as you're kind of escalating the, I would say, intensity, maybe volume of the argumentation, not the volume of your voice per se, always gentle and kind, but when biblical reasoning doesn't work, when all the resources, all the patience and time, you finally can get to a point, and I've had this conversation where I've essentially said, okay, you don't want to join our church, you don't want to enter the process of membership, but you want to be a regular attender, you expect to be a part of the community per se. What do you expect of me as the pastor or your pastor? And typically they list all the things that a member would expect the pastor to provide. And so then I would say, so you expect a commitment from me to you, but you're not going to commit to me or to us. And
Got him.
that sort of, that will turn sometimes the light bulb on. Or even just to appeal, some people can be appealed to on the basis of, well, we have all decided formally this is what our community believes. You want all of us now to somehow center on you as an exception. And some people can be appealed that way because suddenly they feel like, oh, well,
shame them into
almost
membership.
shame. Yeah.
That's good.
Not quite, but yeah. Sometimes that works as well. Yeah. But it's sort of like you want to shack up. I mean, we've been using the marriage analogy. It's sort of like you want all the benefits of marriage without the commitment. You're not going to put a ring on my finger, but you want me to act like I'm your husband. That's kind of what it is.
That's good. Right there. Question?
Christy Hudgens from Berean Baptist Church in Bolivar, Missouri. Is there ever a point where discipleship would lead into church membership? So you mentioned that they shouldn't be discipled unless they are a church member, but is it ever a possibility to work somebody through discipleship where they understand church membership? And then the second question kind of has to do with that, but Philip, you mentioned that you weren't interested in church membership for many years. What led you, or what was the process that you went through to get there?
I'll take the second question.
I'll take let me answer the first one.
You want to take the first one?
Well, I just think the first step, like, so think about Matthew 28, go and make disciples of all the nations. So if somebody is not a Christian, they're not a disciple, they're not a member of a church, so should we just forget that? No, like, it begins with evangelism. So the first act of discipling is evangelism, but then teaching them to obey all that I have commanded, like, it might take time. I think when we're saying that the church is the place where we know who we're responsible for, it's not saying that we don't disciple people who are not outside of our church ever. Like, if that means encouraging them to follow Jesus, of course we do that. We help other people. We're not members of the same church together. We're kind of discipling each other. We're discipling as we teach. But the formal commitment ongoing should be connected to membership. So that's the way I understand that conversation. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but
And I would expect in the situation you described with my friend, this brother or sister that I'm meeting with, or discipling, I'm wanting to know, are you in a church? Like, because that's going to be probably one of the first things I want to help them as a Christian see, and whether it's helping them come into the church I'm a part of or another one. And until that gets kind of sorted out, I'm going to feel like this relationship is a little bit on hold, because what they really need, they're lacking, and I'm going to feel uneasy about that for their sake until it's sorted out.
But you would say you are discipling them into
Totally.
membership,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
so another picture is, I care for the kids in my home. I have 2 boys. I care for the kids in my home a certain way because I'm their father, and I'm in a relationship with them in that sense. And it's not like I ignore and don't care for my neighbor's kids, but I care for them differently because I'm not in the same covenantal relationship with them in that sense. So that might be a metaphor of that.
And I think one thing to keep kind of going back to is just language. And I know I barely know English, but we use disciple as a verb, and it gets us into some categorical problems if we're not careful. I think it's fine to use, we just have to be more careful with it. In the Bible, it's talking about a noun, something someone is. They are a follower of Jesus. They are synonymous terms. We can use disciple to say, I'm trying to teach somebody, which is fine, but if we're using it overlaid with how the Bible's using it as someone who is conscientiously following Jesus already. So in that sense, I think it's actually helpful to not use it as a verb until they're a disciple as a noun. And I think that can help give a little bit of clarity in terms and kind of bring together what you two are talking about.
And the second question, how did it change the mercy of God to basically let me live a life independent and individualistic in my philosophy, to the point where my sin was so amassed on my own back as a result of that, that it helpfully just broke me. And I realized, Lord, if you let me have my individualistic purposes, I would walk straight into the pit of hell. And I need you. I need you. I need people to guide me, and I need the church. And I went back, and my life changed.
We're reading, our staff is reading A Strange New World by Carl Trueman, and where he's exploring how we got from 30 years ago, the statement, I'm a woman trapped in a man's body, that being weird 30 years ago, to now being not only normal, but protected by law. And one of the things we keep saying as a staff is, we're realizing as we read this book is, what do we do? What do we do? What do we do? How do we respond? And over, the answer is the church. And there's lots of things we can do for conversations and evangelism, but in one sense, I think, even as you just described, brother, the church is kind of this outpost of the kingdom of God where we're loving each other, we're following Jesus, we're repenting of our sin, we're trying to walk in holiness, we're distinct from the world, and as the world tastes the bitter fruits of what is in enmity with God and in rebellion against God, and they meet the bitter end of that, hopefully by God's mercy, they'll look up and see, oh, like, you guys keep having hope, you keep having love, this isn't working, this is working. And again, there's the evangelism and there's the discipling, which is as you're describing, you tasted the bitter end of that, you looked up and there was the church doing the same thing it was doing for the last 2,000 years.
Yep.
And you're like, okay, So, yeah. Yeah, right back there.
Jared Rivera, First Baptist Church, Tipton. My question was, as you guys, you actually, Brian, hinted at it, those 6 requirements. What are those? Some of them might be just check marks. Some of them being quantifiable. What are those quantifiable requirements for membership? Like you have to be there 75% of the year on a Sunday morning. Check the box. Are you giving? Like, what are some of those things that you would encourage us to consider as quantifiable measurements for membership?
I not necessarily saying do what I do. This is just what I do. And one of the reasons for it is it's possible to go through a membership class and it to feel so big that you kind of, okay, but what does this what does this mean? So we have 6 membership expectations. We're not exhaustive, but it's enough to kind of let people know what we're going for day to day. The first is that they are regularly at service on Sunday at our church. And we try to tease out what that means. And because we don't encourage people to take the membership class quickly, I'm waiting to be able to say to somebody, what you've been doing, just keep doing that. And so we make all the caveats. We're not talking about you can't be sick. We're not talking about you can't visit another church. But if you're going to be with us, we expect you to be with us. And if you're not going to be here, we just ask that you would let us know. So we're a family. We're going to get together as a family meeting. And if somebody in the family is going to be gone, we want to know where you're at. So let us know if you're okay. If you're discouraged and you need somebody to come get you, or if you're sick, you need to be prayed for. So, but we regularly expect you to be at church on Sunday. The second thing is we tell them that we expect them to be at members' meetings. And so we only have 6 a year. Like, they do not change. And if it's on Easter or Christmas or Father's Day, we're going to have a members meeting that Sunday. And that way we let them know when the schedule is so that they can plan their life around it. There's only 6. And when you
On
consider,
Christmas, really?
what better way
a
would
members
Jesus
meeting?
like to be honored than his people getting together and worshiping him?
Okay. Well,
I'm just saying. I'm just saying. We try not to have one, though. But there's been situations, I think on Easter, we had a members meeting once on Easter. And people were like, oh, I was like, it's Easter. It was Resurrection Day and the Lord's Day. It's a double dip day. But there's only 6, and it's not, it's only gonna happen every so years. I mean, anyways, the third thing is that they are regularly involved in folding other members into their life, and that phrase that we use, right, seeking to do other spiritual good. And we have a pretty open home. We try to have a lot of people in our home, and we just tell people, hey, if you ever need help doing this, feel free to come to our house. We have an open door policy. Or if you ever need help trying to connect with other members, just let us know. Also, when we vote people in, we always have several members reach out to them and meet up with them. And so we're just trying to say you're here to help out, and we're gonna help you out. We need you to help us out. The fourth thing we do is that they will regularly take the Lord's Supper with us. And we try to explain that the Lord's Supper is not for any perfect people, but it's for repentant people taking it by faith. And if there's ever a week if there's ever a time where they're abstaining from the Lord's Supper longer than a week, that they come let us know just to make sure that they're taking it by faith. But it's one of the ways we evidence we're one body. So we want them regularly taking the Lord's Supper with us. They're regularly praying for the members of the church, so we make sure that they have a directory, that they know who the members of the church are so that they can pray for all the saints, and that they commit to regularly support the ministry of the church financially as the Lord prospers them. So there's 6 things, and there's a lot of kind of movement within those 6 things that we try to share. I don't know where the brother was who asked that, but and side note, just a random question. If you're at a First Baptist church, can you raise your hand? Wow. All right.
A lot of firsts.
Yeah, it's good. Everybody's saying First Baptist.
Other questions? Yeah, right here?
Hi, I'm Colin Morris. I'm from Ignite Church in Moorhead. Pertains to the question, I do part-time preach at a small country church in Minnesota.
Minnesota?
Yes, I'm from Moorhead, Minnesota.
I don't know where that's at. I'm sorry.
Fargo. Do you know where that is?
You betcha. Yeah. He knows what I did there. We had a moment. Okay. Yeah.
So we come from a small farming community, me and my wife. We have a lot of churches that are Sunday only kind of churches. They're very small. What would be a way to get them involved in discipleship, or what would that look like?
Brother, can I ask a question? Follow-up question. What's the reason that you understand them to be Sunday only? Is it because of distance? Is it because of tradition? Is it what's your understanding?
I would say it's a mix of tradition, and a lot of them do farming, so that's kind of an all-time thing.
So farming prevents them from caring for each other?
Well, just it's a full-time job. That would be a lot of their excuses.
I have an uncle and a grandfather who are farmers, and they were involved. So, I mean, anyway, sorry. Yeah, sorry.
I think it's hard, unless you have the pulpit, honestly, to change the culture of a church. If you don't have the pulpit, it's tough. At that point, you're left with setting a good example yourself and encouraging people to do what you do.
Do you have the pulpit? Did I hear that right? Once a month. Okay, once a month, yeah.
Just to piggyback on what Jonathan's saying, though, I do think that's true, and I think the elders, the pastor is kind of they're examples of the disciplers in the church. They're discipling guys and others in the church, and that you want that to trickle down. So you think of A.B. Bruce's training of the 12, or Robert Coleman's master plan of evangelism, or Charleston the Vine. They're all saying the same thing. Like Jesus discipled, and then they disciple disciplers to help disciple other people. So you start with your example, with your preaching, and then prayerfully over time, other people, other men and women are opening their lives and their homes, so that culture of discipleship begins to form. But it's a slow process. There's not just some program we can pull off the shelf and then within 6 months it's there. So, because some people are leery of it in a smaller town and it feels intrusive, so you just have to kind of teach and model that over time, I think.
I do think, though, amen to what they said, but setting an example is not a bad thing. And so even if it's going to be limited in its effect. So I think Jonathan's right. But I think if that's a community particularly you want to minister in, I do think you want to be able to hold out at some point. Imitate me as I imitate Christ. So what does it look like to do that with those particular contextual sensitivities? So whether it's you going to somebody's house, I don't know, and helping them farm. I don't know what all that means, man. Or you just waking up super crazy early to go have a time of prayer with one of those farmers. I think there's things you can do that would be sustainable, that gives them a vision for like, oh snap, I didn't even think about doing that. And sometimes that's what the saints don't have. It's just like, I totally never even thought of that. And so your example can actually do much. And it will only be amplified by the fact you do have the pulpit some of the time. So this, I think Paul's word to Timothy, let anybody despise your youth, but set for the believers an example. I think I would do the best I could with what you have.
Some of the best spiritual conversations I had with my grandfather was when we were in the combine and he couldn't get away. So we had hours of talking, and he said things I had never heard from him before because we just had hours together. So
Sitting
I think
there
that
milking a cow together, you know what I mean?
Sure. Have you ever milked a cow, Brian?
No.
Okay.
No, man.
Any other questions?
Move along, move along.
Right back there. Yep.
Andrew Abbott, Calvary Baptist in Leavenworth. So I'll ask the question and then add a real-life scenario that applies to this. So the specific question is, what are some practical ways, and we've hit on this, but some very practical ways to delineate members from non-members. And here's the situation. Some months ago, 15 minutes before service, had two men come up to me and simply say, what is your church's position on homosexuality, right? 15 minutes before service, quickly explained that to them. And they said, we're married, thank you for telling us we're wrong. And at that point, I'm like, never gonna see these guys again, right? They're gonna go away, but that has not been the case. They've dived in fully. They're every Sunday morning, join small group, eating in people's homes, showing signs of growth, right? And moving towards the Lord. So my question with that is, I fully reject the sort of belong, believe, become mentality, but using this marriage illustration, does this sort of common law membership, of just proximity, threaten the purity of the church and its proclamation of the gospel? How do we balance that?
It does. I've not been in that specific situation before, but I have had cohabitating couples who profess faith, regular attend, a small church setting. They've become in some ways a part of the ongoing community of the church. And what I had to do two things. One was, and one particular couple I'm thinking of, we would call baby Christians. So we're being patient with them, and we're letting them sort of get re-evangelized by the life of our church. But over time, as someone who cares about their spiritual state, I say to them, hey, look, the relationship you're engaged in, the arrangement is unbiblical, it's sinful, and you have said that you follow Jesus, that you claim that you're Christians, which means that you're turning from your sin, and you're turning from the way of the world, and you're turning towards Christ, and you're wanting to follow Christ. So in obedience to Christ, you really need to get married. And so that's number one. Secondly, though, the church needs to be prepared for supporting them. If they're going to obey Jesus, the church exists, and this kind of speaks to Philip's message as well, as the context for a Christian's obedience. If we're going to make the demands of Christ upon them, we need to also be prepared to support them as they obey Jesus. And so this particular couple, for instance, had some story, I don't even know if it was entirely true, but had some story about if we get married, she loses medical benefits that she only receives as a single person. And so now we're saying, okay, to follow Christ means you're going to receive this burden. Well, we're putting this expectation on you to follow Jesus. We want to support you in that. So if you have financial needs, medical burdens, we're not just going to give you the obligation to follow Jesus and not come along and support you as you follow Christ. We want to be there to help you. So don't let that be the reason you don't obey Jesus. You guys get married, whatever happens with this situation, we will be there to help support. And this is this situation you described is in some ways more serious and more significant. But whatever the fallout of that is, if you want to follow Jesus, you're in sin. You need to repent of your sin. You need to divorce, whatever that means in the eyes of the law, and acknowledge that this marriage is not a biblical, real marriage. And whatever that entails, whatever burdens that's now going to put on you because of the arrangement you've made with your life, we want to be here to help support you. We want to encourage you. We're not just telling you to do something and we're going to stand back and let you be on your own. If you actually decide to follow Jesus, that means that you're coming into the life of a church. We're going to help you follow Jesus together.
It's good. I think that there's a lot at stake if your church knows that these people are not following Jesus, and you're regularly taking the Lord's Supper with them without kind of warning them not to, because especially if you're teaching your church what 1 Corinthians 11 says, to treat those who are taking the Lord's Supper as the church, to treat them as the body of Christ, and to look, you're discerning the church, you're judging the church there. And so Paul is saying, don't, in 1 Corinthians 5, don't treat people as the church that aren't part of the church. And in 1 Corinthians 11, make sure you treat everyone around the table as the church. And there's a lot at stake there. We don't want to teach our congregation that and then kind of implicitly ask them to defile their conscience by taking the Lord's Supper with people that are clearly not Christians.
Friends, it is 5:45. You're doing awesome. We have one more talk. So we're going to take a 5-minute break. And when we come back, Jared's going to help us think through membership and loving those across divides when that makes it a challenge. And so we'll kind of end our day today on that topic. So take a 5-minute break. We'll come back at 5:50.